YouTube, Twitter. Oh, I think it's working. I think maybe it's working. Twitter's thinking about it. Can you not do 1080p on Twitter? Hold up. I gotta get this working real quick. Oh, and I think I just went live with my old title. Oh well. Oh well. Okay. Let's go. Let's stop Twitter, modify it real quick. Output. Nvenc. Nvenc. And then we should be able to... What's 720p? Oh my goodness. What is 720p? $1280 by 720. Okay, let's try that. 1280 by 720. If I can't get X up, then we'll just do that later. But I'd like to try it. Create broadcast. Stop. Start. Says it's running in OBS, but it doesn't seem... Oh, there we go. Recommended encoder settings. Oh, they actually recommend 1080p. Okay. I'll do 1080p. Get from OBS. Start Twitter. Like 2 more minutes of trying to get this to work, and then we're gonna skip this and give up. Or maybe it's just the preview. Oh, it wants H.264. I wonder if that matters. Stop that. That. Start that. Still says just AVC, not H.264. Still doesn't like it. Okay, we'll mess with Twitter later. Or X. Whatever. Yes, leave form. Go get me a... Just do a regular... Post that. Post that. All right, let's get started here. We'll figure that out another day. All right, so we're gonna do some articles today, and first up is React is holding me hostage. So let me make a marker real quick. I gotta get this set up. I should do that here. I probably need to close that, pop out a new dashboard, new chat real quick here. Marker. Okay. React is holding me hostage. All right. React is holding me hostage. A love-hate relationship. Interesting. I'm just going to preface this with, to start, I appreciate what React did for the front-end community, but I'm not a fan. So I'm really interested to see where this goes. I'm interested to see why they're not in love with React quite as much as they were as they used to be. So I'm very interested to see what they say here. So switch this off real quick because that's distracting. All right. React is holding me hostage. A love-hate relationship. Prologue. It feels like this article would have been sacrilege only a few years ago. Under the protection of their newfound trendiness in React displeasure, I'd like to finally say my piece. It is trendy to hate on React right now. It's like, I understand what React did for the community and how it pushed web development forward, but I do personally think it's overcomplicating quite a bit. So let's see if that's where they go or if they go somewhere else with this. So I'll be interested to see. I don't much care for React, and frankly I'd say the same is true for most. Even if you have yet to actualize your resentment. Well, I've been using React for quite long enough to say I'd prefer the company of another. I mean, I'm practically a React developer, for Pete's sake. My last company, this company, probably my next company, I can't seem to avoid it. You'd think I'd stop caring so much after a while, but it just takes one look at the alternatives to wonder why you ever stayed. That's my thing. I never really started with React, so I was able to jump straight into the Vue world. And then from there to Svelte, and then from there I've been playing with HTMX. I still work mostly in Vue, but all my personal stuff I've been doing in HTMX lately, or if I really need a lot of client-side state and client-side rendering, I'll go with Svelte. So React has always been hard. when I was first starting out, it was way too complicated, and you weren't supposed to use Create React App. You're supposed to use something else, and then or eject from Create React App. You had your Webpack build you had to maintain. Like when I first was trying to pick what front end framework I liked, that was the world that I started in, and Vue was just a better experience than that. Like it was just a single all-in-one package, good framework. So, yeah, I was kind of amazed why React was ubiquitous, but it might just be survivorship bias. Like it's just been around long enough that it was the default. So I don't know. I tell you, React is not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, it was, obviously. When React came on the scene, it looked so elegant. Component code with a focus on locality of behavior. Yeah, that's a big thing with HTMX. Oh, this is the HTMX essay. Sweet. Yeah, I'm going to go over this once and talk about this in a different video at some point. But yeah, no, I think there's something to this. I'm not 100% sold on locality of behavior versus separation of concerns, but there's something compelling about locality of behavior. Yeah. Well, I've been using React for quite long enough to say we already read that. I mean, it was, we got to locality of behavior. That's right. Your DOM was inlined, sat right next to its event handlers. Your code looked modular. It was neat. This was cool to see when it, like, early on in the web development scene, like, being able to do this. And I didn't mind the class component syntax. I felt like it made some sense, and then you had proper methods for setting state. Like it just kind of made more sense to me, but I came out of an object oriented college program. There was a lot of OOP and design patterns that came with my college education. So this made more sense than like stateless functional components. So, or functional components as they became. So tutorials were born, books were written, gurus were created. React had erected an empire faster than I'd seen done before. The developer experience was unparalleled, but better than that, it was obvious. The first to try a taste were the conference goers, the thinkfluencers, the nerdiest of us. The library spread. How could it not? It was syntactically simple, so we all bought in. Little did they know what was coming. Complexity. And then we were gifted with hooks. Huzzah. To be honest, they were a bit foreign at first, but clear. To be honest, they were... I can't talk tonight. Oh my gosh. Okay. And then we were gifted hooks. Huzzah. To be honest, they were a bit foreign at first, but the clarity, the newfound elegance, quicker to type, faster to iterate, easier to read, React was the correct choice. Yep. Okay. So then we had functional components, use state, and then this. I hate that. I don't like array destructuring. I know it can be type safe in TypeScript, but it just feels like named destructuring with an object is better, but I digress. Handle click, set number, and then local state gets updated every time it's clicked. But then the years pass and you start to notice the wealth of our alternatives. Every month a new name. We scoff at these newfangled weekend projects. They never catch on. React is battle tested. React has molded itself perfectly into the hole we found previously. There's no room left for a new kind of spackle. I like I said, I stayed out of React in the beginning. Like, I did not start with React. I tried to get into React, and it just wasn't for me. Like, it just didn't click with my brain. So, yeah. I just, it wasn't for me. It just wasn't. And then people start speaking too positively, too consistently. It feels like everybody's happy with their new things and less happy with the old thing. But those are just passing fads. Nothing like how React stood the test of time from its launch in 2015 and iteration in 2019 and constant evolution. This constant evolution came at a cost, though, and one that Vue paid as well, because React went completely functional. The use state sort of stuff started coming around. Guess who also adopted that? It was Vue 3. And then Vue went through its own revolution where the old style of components were phased out for the newer syntax, which admittedly is better, but it created a ton of churn moving from Vue 2 to Vue 3. We moved all our apps from Vue 2 to Vue 3, and maybe we did it early, but maybe we did it too early, but it was painful. There was a lot to rewrite in that. React doesn't feel so stable anymore. I mean, maybe it's the best choice, but who really knows? I thought we were done iterating, but I just keep getting swept along with some new change. Maybe there's a better way I just haven't seen yet. I can't possibly hurt to look. It can't possibly hurt to look, and yet it does. Because every time you do, you have to rewrite your app. You don't have to rewrite your app. Most of them are just a hodgepodge of all the different methods combined together. Your large apps become like a mishmash of the old way of doing syntax and the new one, and React just can't move off of, like, they can't. I don't think they've gotten rid of class components, but at some point they're going to probably need to, given that hooks and functional components are the new way of doing things. And I say new, this has been years. Like, I was still in college when this all went down. This was like years ago. Yeah. What year were hooks introduced? Was it 2019? 2018 at React Conf. Yeah, I was still in school. Like, this was a long time ago. It was 6 years ago. And yet it does. React and hooks. Evan Yu, so this is the creator of Vue.js. Hooks created a lot of problems that simply do not exist in idiomatic JS. Difficult to optimize, too heavily invested in runtime semantics, which makes it difficult to evolve in a direction that makes more use of compilers. That says quite a bit about someone who saw the way React was doing things with use state and hooks and went and adopted at least the use state sort of style of things. Vue didn't really they didn't really create hooks per se, but they moved towards that same paradigm that React did. So this speaks volumes, I think. Hooks isn't React, but honestly it might as well be. React hooks is a distinction from React itself. You can use class components after all. However, it's taken over the React landscape to the point where hooks seem inherent to React development. When I refer to React's model of things in this article, I'm referring to React hooks. I recently read someone's astonishment at how smoothly React's ecosystem transition to hooks was. What? I don't remember that. Like, I remember it being a mess. Everyone was like, what is this thing? Like, why are we doing this? I like class components. Give us class components back. Like, I don't think that was what the case. How everyone was unilaterally, I can't say that word. I know the word, but I can't say it. How everyone was unilaterally in agreement on its benefit. This is not the past I remember. Okay, I'm not the only one, at least. I remember quite a bit of contention, particularly on the Orange site, but not exclusive to it. I think I understand now where a lot of ideological resistance to React hooks comes from. So this is a thread. Oh, this is gone. Oh, okay. Now this is Dan's old account, so I'm not necessarily siding with the anti-hook crowd, but I do think a lot of their concerns were warranted. React hooks existed within an environment. Sorry, I had to move something real quick. React hooks existed within an environment controlled by class components. To allow this transition, React had to be fully compatible with class code, and it was. This compatibility, combined with the composability and readability improvements, ushered the industry as a whole to adopt hooks quicker than one would predict. But it wasn't across the board though. Hooks weren't everywhere. Hooks were just the way you wrote React from then on. That meant there were tons of class components that were still existing. So I bet Microsoft Word, one of the bigger React code bases, I bet, and Outlook, I bet they have class components everywhere in their applications. I do generally think hooks brought up I do generally think hooks brought both these improvements. While it's not universally agreed upon, I'm in the firm composability over inheritance camp, and I think sharing behavior via functions is a drastic improvement over class inheritance. As for readability, while the length of your code might not be directly correlated with legibility, see regex code golfing, React hooks improve locality of behavior. They Do they though? If you create your own hook with its own behavior and you put that into a separate file, like, do they actually make locality of behavior more of a thing as opposed to class components? Like, I'm not a React developer, so I don't know, but were they really using, like, did they use inheritance outside of just inheriting and extending for that the React base class? I Let me know in the comments if they did. I'm like I said, I'm not a React developer. It's never clicked for me, but I would be interested to know, did they use inheritance outside of just the React framework, or did they do something else? Your eyes do less scanning in smaller components. Event listeners, state transformations, and rendered output can have your eyes jumping up and down. React hooks improve on this. I find function components work both quicker to write and easier to read. I guess it's like Vue. You can move things within the component, so things that make sense, like when you're reading the component, I guess you could probably make it make more sense as you're going, rather than putting specific things in specific areas. You instead just have like a nice linear view. So I can buy that for locality of behavior. Readability versus complexity. But readability, at least the immediate sense, does not itself go hand in hand with complexity. Hooks lowered complexity via localizing behavior, but increased it via the abstractions it had to make. I think about this out of context quote from Amos a lot. Or rather, it's a half-truth that conveniently covers up the fact that when you make something simple, you move complexity elsewhere. Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like. It's just pushing the abstraction elsewhere. I I really liked what Svelte did before runes. I know I probably just need to get used to runes, but I liked the fact that it was just JavaScript, and there was this one little piece that you added, and Svelte was able to interpolate when you wanted a reactive variable. But other than that one $ label, everything was just JavaScript. And I think that's what we want. I think that's what we want the ecosystem to move towards. And Vue too have all these primitives that like wrap JavaScript, and they create their own language abstractions on top of JavaScript. And that, I don't think that's what we want. It almost makes me it doesn't almost. I actually think JavaScript needs reactive primitives built into JavaScript into the syntax level. I don't think we want like special functions or anything. I think we want special syntax like Svelte introduced. Maybe it looks a little different, but I think we should have something that simple for managing reactive primitives. So I think there's something more we could do in the JavaScript ecosystem to make this better. So, when we abstract over complex systems, we don't eliminate complexity, we move it. In our case, the complex system is not front-end development, but React. And that was one of the things I just couldn't get over. Even in the first iterations of React, it felt too complex. Hooks move our mental model around to think about state transformations and synchronizations instead of life cycles, or at least attempts to. Component did mount, use effect. Component will unmount, use effect. Yeah. There were some sacrifices to performance brought out by this movement. Its bandages visible as the hooks use memo and use callback. I don't mean to imply that memoization did not predate React hooks. In fact, like use callback, like in Vue got something similar. It was use effect, and sometimes people just used use effect everywhere. It was crazy. I like some code bases I saw were just like, no, don't do that. Like use computed props or functions or something. Don't just use effect everywhere. So yeah, these were band-aids. These are band-aids still around today. It did React memo. I'm saying here we now have to memoize state initialization and transformation due to the improvements we've made in localizing behavior. There's a common community conversation on memoization in React. Much more than that other frameworks. Value caching is important in all frameworks, but hooks force a lot of that decision making onto the component author and not the core library. And I don't have to think about any of that in Vue or Svelte. That's just one thing that just I don't have to think about any of it, and that's awesome. So we'll get more to that later, but before we continue, I'd like you to take a moment to discuss our mental model. There's a model you'll often read about in React's docs or YouTube videos there's what is really happening, or at least there exists a mental model that. Let me try to read that paragraph again. Like I said, I can't read tonight, and I don't know why. There's a model you'll often read about in React docs or YouTube videos, and there's what is really happening. Or at least there exists a mental model more true to the actual behavior, and one I think important to go over. A better mental model. It's rare to see a conversation about React itself without seeing the term VDOM sprinkled about. Dan Abramov doesn't seem to be a fan of this. I agree with him here. The React VDOM should not be our focus. React is not its VDOM. The VDOM is a consequence of React, not the cause of it. Although when discussing the immediate difference, it's something easy to point to. It is easy to point to, and I do think there's something to be said about React being something that, like, I think there's something to moving away from the VDOM, because I don't think we really need it. Like, Svelte doesn't have it. Vue Vapor gets rid of it. Like, I don't think we need a VDOM, at least not most of the time. I think it should be opt-in instead of opt-out. And if you're choosing to use it, you probably understand the consequences of using it. But the browser can optimize those hot paths in C++ way better than you can in JavaScript. So I think phasing out VDOM by default is probably a good thing. We should instead be focusing on how React components are meant to be pure. I don't know if that's true, but I will say reactive primitives break the pure function. Like, functional components with use state are not pure. Like, by definition, that use state function is a side effect that you're introducing. Like, it it almost feels like functional components are kind of a lipstick on a pig there. It's like it's trying to be this thing, this pure function, but you can't be, because you have mutable state on the client side. And things like Svelte and Vue accept this and write better primitives around it. So I don't know if this should be the focus. This term seems immediately misplaced when we remember that components have state. State seems directly contrary to the idea of a pure function. Sometimes, or something that produces the same output for a given set of inputs, no matter the amount of times or ways in which it's called. I think these are fine. And these are fine and great, and yes, this one's easier to test and reason about than this one necessarily, because you really should be mocking that dependency on the date time.now object, and that gets fun. But by definition, your applications are going to have a bunch of mutable state. So I don't know what to tell you, honestly. The trick is understanding that React is not stored on the component. Oh, the trick is understanding that state in React is not stored on the component. So the downside to what they're about to say, I think, is that you have state in one global store. And so instead of local state, you have global state in Redux, which isn't always great. Global variables aren't nice. They create systems that depend on global state, and then you have to mock global state when you go to test your components, and that's not pure. It's not a pure function. So I don't necessarily buy this. State is yet another input. In the land of React, calls to use state are a way of receiving inputs. State lives on the React VDOM state tree component, which is a global variable, and that's global mutable state. So I don't get it. Components are called in a very ordered manner, and use state will pop inputs off a provided stack. Yeah, use state. Yeah. Both state and props are kinds of inputs. State, or calls to set state, are signals to React's internals, not direct mutations. These signals will in turn update its component state stack and rerun a component. This component will then produce a certain output given this new input. So you have a component and the root state changes, and React knows to update just that component in the VDOM. These signals will in turn update its component state stack and rerun a component. This component will then produce a certain output given its new input. Yeah. React components might as well be black box to React. Interesting way of saying that. Its internal behavior is not viewable. We can think of components themselves being reactive, objects instead of individual pieces of state. That's commonly what people mean when they describe React's reactivity model as not being fine-grained. Yeah. That is because it's built to have one single state going in the top of it, and you're supposed to, as per the original design, drill your props all the way down. That's the way to make your application pure, is to drill your props all the way down through everything. Like, drill your state in objects and just push that all the way down. That's what React was originally designed to be, and it doesn't work for most people. That's why they need a global mutable store, is because of that. That's commonly what people mean when they describe React, as not being fine-grained. For this reason, React needs a way to not rewrite the entire DOM on each update, and therefore runs through a diffing process on each new update to decide what DOM node needs updating. And it's expensive to do that. That's so many if statements that are being run essentially concurrently. Maybe none, maybe all. We can't know without checking. Exactly. Exactly. One sec. Not only can I not talk, I have a cough too. It's not fun. But anyway, this is React. This is the relationship between the renderer and the reconciler. This this pure component behavior, this lack of direct connection between state and DOM updates. In React, components are real. The DOM is not. It's virtualized, essentially. That's why you can do things with React Native, because React is a virtualized abstraction layer on top of concrete primitives. Perhaps this is why React makes such a good choice for non-web renderers. See? You can use React in the terminal. You can use it on mobile. You can do whatever you want with it, because it's an abstraction layer. And that can be good in some cases, but often the abstraction layer means you're one step away from the thing you're really using, and when you got problems, you don't understand necessarily how to get underneath and deal with the actual thing underneath. We can use React to describe UI and updates, but swap out process by which these new updates are applied to our UI. As a web developer, this is not a great enough upside. Yeah, I agree. Finding footguns. The quickest obstacle you'll run into as someone new to React will be something like this. We've got number and set number. We use state42. We've got an infinite loop where we set number n plus 1, return number. I don't know what set. Yeah. Trying to make state updates at the top level component will result in an infinite loop. State updates rerun components. This doesn't mean any DOM update, but it does mean another state update will trigger another rerun, which triggers a state update, which triggers a... Yep. You end up in that loop. And then you'll do a Stack Overflow, most likely. You'll probably find that bug pretty quickly. Infinite loops like this one aren't too difficult to spot. Wait, so React doesn't detect this sort of thing? Like Vue detects it and throws the error, but does React not? If it doesn't, I'm kind of surprised. Things get more complicated when you start using React context and start signaling updates in a parent component. The render cascades. Maybe one component fetches some data, some component remounts, and you run your state update again, delayed by a few seconds. This pattern is common enough to be deserving of its own article, but it isn't an article on how to fix your React problems. It's a rant. Let's continue the discussion on components existing as reactive objects, not state. There are some consequences of this pattern. Okay, so we got 3 state variables, and they go into 3 different inputs. Okay. I've oversimplified this component for the purposes of not causing you immense pain, but anyone who has worked with forms in React know that they are often a lot more complex. I regularly see form components with 300 plus lines. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. In the HTMX world, the forms are easy. Forms are really, really easy because all your validation is done on the server side where you need to do validation anyway. So you can do all the validation you want, even in real time as you type. You can throttle it and then send it over to the server side for validation, and it'll come back and tell you before you hit the submit button that your password's too long. So this sort of client side form rendering. Even in Vue, forms get hard. At least that's been my experience. So involved is state transformations, validations, and error views. A lot of this is inherent to forms, not just React. React tends to complicate things, however, by a lot. Remember, components are reactive, not state. When working with controlled inputs, we are causing a re-render on every key press of our inputs. This means we're potentially running state computation code regardless of any kind of state being touched. But VDOM fixes all that. This seems to be a prevalent anti-VDOM fallacy. The VDOM prevents extraneous DOM updates, not state computations. Yeah, because you have to run the state computation first before you can compare if the DOM nodes are different. Your component is a function that is quite literally being rerun each time we need to check for updates. When the DOM itself might not be touched, code is running that does not need to run. Imagine the following component. My input, label text, to title case text input. Okay. And then we have that. Yep. And then is error. You put an error in. A more realistic example, I think, we've decided to fix label inputs provided to us by transforming them into title case. For now, it's fine. I've decided not to memoize anything because the computation seems simple enough. But what if things changed? What if title case grew in complexity? Perhaps over time we slowly add features to create ultimate title caser TM. It's how it happens every time. Why don't we market this library? Const my form, and then there's 3, and then there's the 3. On every keystroke, we now have to return to title case in every component. Our uses of useState has made our entire form render or form component reactive to changes in any of its states. Oh no. Or, I mean, is that a problem? Browsers are pretty fast. Hardware is pretty fast. Maybe it's not an issue. But if you adhere a little closer to primitives, if you take the hypermedia approach, that form is so easy to do and deal with. It's so much simpler than how React wants you to do it. Well, it isn't until it is. Incrementally adding computations in different places won't cause much harm, but keep doing that and it'll eventually you've created a sluggish experience. Now you must face the problem that there's no single source of performance pains. It's everywhere. Fixing this requires a lot more work than you'd like to expend. Aren't you forgetting about use memo? Ah, yes. That. Memoization. I'm sure there was a confident consensus on this. For every pro memoization article, there's another against it. You see, memoization has a performance cost. Dan Abramov has repeatedly pointed out that memoization does not incur the cost of comparing props, and that there are many cases where the memoization checks can never prevent re-renders because the component has always receives new props. As an example, see this Twitter thread from Dan. I don't know. Yeah, this is his old account. It's gone. So, that sucks. That comment was in reference to React.memo, which is a slightly different form of memoization in React. My input memoized, React memo my input. Okay. Memoizing entire components stops the cascade of a render from needing to check its children. This feels like a sensible default, but the React team seems to think the performance cost of comparing props outweighs the average performance cost of letting a massive render cascade take place. I figure that's probably wrong. Mark seems to agree. What's this? A mostly complete guide to React rendering behavior. Oh my. Oh my. Yeah, I'm not getting into that. that's a mountain. I may get into it later, but not now. It also makes the type look even uglier. Most code bases I've looked at tend to avoid React Memo until absolutely certain it will create a significant improvement in performance. And it sucks that you have to use it to get more performance, that the framework doesn't opt in, like by default, give you the more performant option. This is different from when I was saying like we should pull the VDOM out and use and make that opt in, because that's only going to work in your favor in specific use cases. Checking the DOM is probably going to be fine in most cases. Like I said, browsers are going to optimize hot paths, and if you use them more and you don't use the VDOM as much, those will get faster and faster. Another argument against memoization is that it's easy for a React memo to be ineffective when the parent code isn't written correctly. So skill issues. If you have skill issues, it'll be slower. Yeah, that's a fair argument, I guess, but kind of obvious. Memoizing to prevent re-renders. Child, React memo, username, function parent 2, re-renders anyway. Yep. We're comparing props in the fastest way possible. Shallow inequality. This appears like a new prop on each re-render. Since re-renders are common, we need to be aware of this. Components are being the reactive primitives here. We can fix some memoization issues by moving state through components. I don't particularly enjoy this kind of discussion when I'm trying to create a product. Yeah, I said use memo, not React memo. Fair enough. Let's talk about that a bit. We fall into the same performance considerations with use memo. We have a cost of comparing dependencies now instead of props. You have to declare a dependency list, which is lame. Don't spend too much time reading that. It's just nonsense for demonstration purposes. But did you notice anything weird? There are two discrete state transformations. One is a list operation, and the other calls some function on the resulting data. We accidentally memoize too much. What happens if randomizer changes? We rerun the whole function. We should have rewritten this. Oh. Now our values are more specific. Changes to randomizer will not rerun our map and filter and only the pick item call. The day is saved, I think. This dependency chain is stuff that like React should be able to figure out for you. Like there should be a compile step, and maybe with the React compiler this is a non-issue, but something that should be figured out for you. I tend to automatically memoize data when I see a list operation. Is that the qualifier? I don't know. I just do it. The most notable issue with memoization is that it's ugly. I don't know that I call it a code smell, as I've read before, but it definitely makes code harder to read. Memoization might help sometimes, but only if we're careful in both the component's usage and compensation, or composition. Caching is not a field of complexity exclusive to React. We're forced to deal with it manually far more often than we'd otherwise need to. Memoization solves problems, but that it can feel frustrating to think about when and where to memoize. The ergonomics are poor. And the fact that you have to do it at all, like it feels like a band-aid. It's always felt like a band-aid fix. Like it's just this thing that they use if your performance is bad and you because the abstraction is leaky. Like it's bad. And it's not a good kind of leaky abstraction. It's a really bad one. On pedagogy. And that's what I'd love to focus on. I've made a hobby out of researching programming pedagogy over the years, and I've been focusing quite a lot on the question of how do you most effectively communicate programming concepts. I don't think I have to answer just yet, but I know how you do the opposite. React has traditionally been you do the opposite by using React. That's how not to teach somebody how to program. I kid. I kid. React has traditionally been taught as this simple component system where the state is connected to UI and updates over time. I've had the pleasure of teaching quite a few people React, people relatively new to frameworks, to React, or to coding in general. React isn't easy, and it's made even more difficult by the obfuscation in teaching materials. I don't know if it's obfuscation per se, it's just a complex topic. These concepts, these mental models we've been going over, might seem trivial to you if you've been working in React for long enough. They're not. They're complex. It isn't for most people. I would argue it's not even normal for most programmers. So, it's not obvious that your component re-renders on state updates. How would that even work? There's no name to go along with each stage usage. How does it remember? Yet sure, the state is kept on a stack on the VDOM in some sense, and that's why ordering is important, and states are also inputs to a component. And state mutations are signaling to a tree which calls the function again to diff the output. But did you know that? Hey Wesley, good to see you here. Did you find out over time? Maybe you read an article, watched a video, or maybe you're significantly smarter than me. I don't imagine I set a high bar. I'm definitely not smarter than you. That's for sure. React, when compared to its contemporary alternatives, presents the complexity of state updates as an active obstacle in development. And these materials required for ease of development are taught mostly as supplementary or advanced topics. I imagine the new React docs will attempt to put a change to that. I sure hope it does. And I hope people realize how many beginners prefer to get their information from videos as opposed to long tutorials. Fixing React. But I want to revisit that forms discussion. The pain has been felt long enough for there to be some change in form best practices. Uncontrolled inputs are all the rage these days. Component updates come from state updates. Controlled components force state update on each form interaction. If we just let the form do whatever, we only need to update submission and validation steps. Yeah, that's basically what the hypermedia approach does. This pattern has been popularized with form libraries like Formic and React Hook Form. We can transform this into this. Wait, what's the difference here? On submit, handle submit. Yeah, on submit, handle submit. Input field, on input. Okay. Gotcha. And then you have a controller. Yes, we've added some complexity, but we've helped with state updates affecting more of the components than we'd like. This doesn't look right, though. This looks more acceptable than this, I'd say. Yes, we've added some complexity, but we've helped with state updates affecting more the components than we'd like. This brings up an interesting point, however. When we look at the React ecosystem, we'll find a whole lot of libraries that exist for the express purpose of fixing React shortcomings. When you see a library advertised as 100x speed and ergonomics improvement, what they're doing is avoiding React. Yeah, they're basically writing their own wrapper and then doing their own thing outside of React. So this is Tanner Lindsley. When I build libraries for React, ironically, I don't really use hooks like useState, useReducer, etc. One of the best perks and footguns of managing your state outside of React is that you get to have full control over when a component should re-render. And I'd take it even further and say let the browser do it. Put it into the hypermedia side of things. Like, we should advance the HTML primitives so we don't have to worry about doing this. Like, all the client-side validation should just happen in the browser. It should just be how it is. We shouldn't have to write code for all this stuff. Which, for the record, I'm not against. It's just abstractly funny to watch the ecosystem of a UI re-renderer work so tirelessly to keep it while avoiding every part of it. And on state discussion, we've got a couple of friends joining us. We've got Redux, XState, ZooStand, Jodai, Recoil, and more. The state discussion in general tends to get depressing because they're usually papering over some form of React context. We must abide by React's rules to trigger UI updates, so there's some form of cascading render effect for all aforementioned libraries. React components cannot share state directly. They have to use, because people can't do prop drilling, they have to use global state, which makes it a nightmare. Global state is bad. Global variables are bad. That's like one of the fundamental things about programming. Don't use global variables unless you know what you're doing. And in React, you put everything there a lot of times. Since state lives on the tree and we only have indirect access to this tree, we must climb the tree up and down instead of jumping from branch to branch. When we do this sort of climb, we can touch things we weren't meant to. Okay. Count Atom, double count Atom. Times 2. Oh, this is gonna double and then double and double. We've cleverly set up some derived state using Jodai, but plugging it into React means we're back to component-based reactivity. You can add fine-grained reactivity systems into React without fixing much. It needs to be integrated on the framework level. I agree. Or even the language level. What would framework integrated fine-grained reactivity look like? Probably something like Solid.js. Are these signals? Count, set count, create signal. Set interval, set count. Yep. Solid is fun to bring up React discussion because its API looks rather similar to React. The major exception being we don't need to wrap code like this in a use effect. Or a... yeah. What was views again? Yeah, I think views is use effect too. Was it? Yeah, I can't remember. I've written a lot of it and now I can't remember it. It's sad. In React, this kind of code would result in a nasty bug where we create a new call to set interval every second. For frameworks that don't have component-based reactivity, the distinction between components kind of fades away. They are useful for setup and UI generation. The state is all that truly matters during the lifetime of your application. Framework like Preact, Vue, Angular, Marco, I've never heard of Marco, Solid, and Svelte have all adopted some form of fine-grained reactivity. They're called signals, stores, observables, or refs. The semantic difference might be important, but I'm going to refer to the concept as a signal. So you have... So you have these things: const, header L, div L, span L, get Ls. You have your name signal, and then you subscribe. Yep. And then you can set it somewhere else. Yep. In this example, we have signals, pieces of state that are aware of their subscribers. When we change the state's value, the signal will inform its subscribers of an update via the function passed in. We don't need to consult some supreme state tree to diff UI outputs before performing updates. It's funny. This is like Vue event buses, like global event buses. Those were like signals before signals were a thing. We can directly connect state to UI changes. Signals can inform other signals as well. Our computed state machines can still exist, just with extraordinarily better ergonomics. You can build your own framework in an hour using reactive primitives as a base model and have code considerably better than it would otherwise be using another reactivity model. This makes it better, but again, I think language level, not like function calls. Like, it should be syntax. It should be some other syntax. In the same sense of rustaceans arguing against new language without memory safety. I'd oppose any new framework without signals. I'd be careful with that. I'd be careful with that. We're finding similar fights in the WASM wars. EU launched and still remains the most prominent Rust front-end framework, but it relies on React-like approach. It only barely beats React in performance, while signal-based Rust frameworks like Leptos and Sycamore cruise past Angular and Svelte. Conclusions on issues. Despite the last paragraph, I don't think just looking at framework benchmarks is enough. React suffers from poor ergonomics. It's far easier to mess up React than it is in Svelte. Sure, hyper-optimized React is only marginally worse than every other framework, but I don't write hyper-optimized code. So in practice, the React code I look at tends to have a dozen or so performance issues per file, ignored for the sake of sanity. React was great when it launched, but there are better options now, almost objectively so. While improvements are made over time, I don't see React changing so fundamentally how it works as to become tolerable again. So why are we still using React? It's battle tested. Hey, that sounds like Java. I can get behind React as the new Java. Large companies have proven it can be productively used. It's easier to make a decision when you see successful products using specific technology. It's Java. Evolved ecosystem. Technically true, but half the ecosystem exists either as React wrappers for vanilla libraries or as React bandage packages. A different reactivity model means it's often easier to plug in third-party libraries outside of React. It means your reactivity model sucks. Bigger workforce. Hard to disagree with this one. If you want a job, your best bet is React. If you want to hire, your best bet is React. Well, I think it's often easier to teach other frameworks. This only makes sense if you have a kind of time and bandwidth to train your engineers. But here's the flip side. There's more jobs in React, but that means there's more workers who know React, which means your pay is proportionate to the number of people and number of jobs. So if you've got more engineers than you do jobs, your pay is going to be less while you do React than if you maybe did one of the other frameworks. So it's just something to think about. Scarcity isn't necessarily a bad thing for you if you're learning something that's more obscure. Not that these other front-end frameworks are really that obscure. Like, they're used in industry. So it's evolving. It's hard to change when the fix is right around the corner. Evolution. And I'd say that the React ecosystem and community has been promised a fix for quite a while now for some of this stuff. It's been quite a while, and they haven't seen anything. Oh, hey, Anono, I just saw your message. How's it going? It's hard to change when the fix is right around the corner. Evolution exists mostly on the full stack space, but every new product is presented as solutions to all of React's ills. It's hard to leave. Migration costs are not worth the perceived benefit. And they're often not. Like, rewriting is not always the best option. Sometimes it's necessary, but people do it way more often than they need to, especially in the front end world. And React, even like keeping with React, like it's still, and Vue, they incentivize it almost. Like they want you to keep rewriting, which is kind of a weird thing. Its reactivity model is unique enough that migrating to another framework takes a lot of time for what isn't immediately obvious as an improvement. Yeah. Yep. And so my current job is React. My next job will be React. The one after might as well. This was good. This was a good overview. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think a lot of things here he's right about. I really do. So if you liked this article, if you liked what I said about it, leave a like on the video, maybe subscribe. If you didn't like what I had to say, tell me why in the comments. Tell me why I'm wrong. Let me know. Because unless you tell me, I won't know. So, we record these on Twitch every Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific. And that's about it. Everybody have a good one. All right. I'm doing pretty good, Anono. I'm doing pretty good. I am sore from the weekend from lifting bags of concrete, but other than that, I'm doing all right. How about you? Oh, you said good, but let's go switch over. Let's go end the marker real quick. Marker. That was a long one. So what do we want to do next? Let's hope the next one, this one should be a little shorter. Hour-long videos are kind of long to post to YouTube. Oh, this one's really short. Okay. This one's about AI content. Marker. Okay, and then I'm going to my throat's super dry. A lot of talking. Alrighty. So let's do the second one. This one should be really short. But I feel like it's something we should probably talk about. I'm tired of it. The epidemic. It's everywhere on dev.to and everywhere else too. I'm tired of it. AI generated content. Me too. Honestly. Before we get into this, I think this is a huge problem that not many people are talking about. The internet is now full of this AI generated content, and a lot of it is built to be like SEO spam, and they can just churn it out like crazy. I think it's a huge problem. It's coming up in every like Google search I've gotten. Like, I can't trust my search results anymore because I've got a Google LLM parsing the top 6 articles that I ask for, and then those 6 articles were generated by LLMs, usually GPT-4. And so I've got an LLM talking about articles written by LLMs. And isn't this the copy problem they said they were going to have? Like, isn't that like when you output LLMs based on LLM content, don't you get degraded content? So I think it's a big problem. I think it's a really big problem. You know, we can spot it. The generic, bland, and boring articles, which are usually filled with inaccuracies. Not grammatical errors, but factual inaccuracies, definitely. And statements that just don't make sense a lot of times. The image without personality. The creepy videos with no real meaning. This is from the Uncanny Valley. But let me tell you, if you do not want to put in the work to research, to learn, to be an expert, to struggle and get good at a craft you enjoy, then you don't provide value in any way. And if you don't provide value, what's the point? It's worthless to anyone out there who would be better off just reading docs or an actual book written by a human. And it's worthless to you because you don't even seem to enjoy the process itself to actually do it. So why even bother? Coding is no longer a craft. Join a gym. What? Coding is 100%. I'm gonna 100% disagree with this. Coding is a craft, and I think betting on it being a craft in the future is going to make you stand out even more in the crowd of people trying to churn out more AI content. I think coding is going. I think being a craftsman of code is going to get you further, at least for the next 10 years. At least. That's my that's my opinion. Yeah. I will enjoy my coding life. And that's the other thing too, is like even if the LLMs get better at coding than me, I'm still going to code. Like I just enjoy it. It's something I enjoy. So it's just what I'm going to do. Yeah, I get it. It's all about those likes and followers, but let me tell you, even those are probably mostly bots. I'm tired of it. I don't think I don't think most of them are bots. I think a good chunk of them probably are. Maybe like up to 30%, but I don't think most are. But I'm tired of it. Pointless articles. And there it is again. Another article on dev.to. Not really interesting to read and full of wrong things and stuff that doesn't even exist. As soon as you point it out to the authors, usually they get pretty defensive, just lying and trying to gaslight you into thinking they actually wrote the article by themselves, even though you can prove the opposite by simply using the title of the article as a prompt to generate an article which sounds 99% identical. Sure, mate, you're allowed to just create a bland article using LLMs, but please don't try to tell me you're actually providing value by doing that. And please, pretty please, at least check if the info is correct. I agree with the info is correct thing. I do think there is some value in curating, like, the things you're putting into the article, maybe from the LLM, but I think you can provide more value and provide more connection to your reader by writing it yourself. That's just how I personally feel, I think. Do the code snippets work? Do the CS properties even exist? And while you're at it, please check if you actually provide any value to me over just reading the docs or putting the prompt into ChatGPT by myself. Sometimes ChatGPT can be good at pointing me in the right place to, like, sometimes it can tell me the thing I'm trying to look for. Sometimes when you're like Googling something, you just don't know the right term for the thing. But if you type it out and describe it to ChatGPT, it spits out the answer, and sometimes it's hallucinated, but that usually means the property doesn't exist. But it can point you in the right direction to the docs, and I like that about it. Like, it's helpful, but you can't take what it gives you at face value at all. So I don't really enjoy writing. I don't enjoy the process of getting good at it. I don't even feel like I have much to say. But still, if I think I want to tell something, I'll write it myself, just because I want to at least try and add value. I want to do things I enjoy. I'm pretty sure creating prompts is not fulfilling to anyone in the long run. I don't think that's necessarily a fair statement. I think some people may enjoy it, but I'm just not one of those people. Like, I get frustrated writing prompts. Like, I get really frustrated with the AI, and that's probably a skill issue. But if I'm frustrated while using it, I'm not going to be inclined to use it again. That's the thing that gets me. Like, it's not something that I feel like good when it's not something I feel good using or feel good when I get better at it. But yeah, so, but I'm tired of it. Email decompression. I've noticed an interesting thing lately. There are people on one side just using a simple prompt to generate an email. Oh, no, we don't need longer emails. Like, just keep it concise and short. Just say what you need to say. Don't write a book. Don't have the LLM write you a book. Just compress the email in a short, terse, like, it can sound terse even. I'm not going to be offended. Just shorten the email. Everybody's going to be happier. And there are other people on the receiving end who take email and paste it into ChatGPT to have it summarized. Yeah, Just, I take my short, concise thing I want to convey, give it to ChatGPT. ChatGPT makes it longer. Then the person who receives it puts it into ChatGPT, and then they make it shorter. It's like, just make it shorter. Oh, oh, it hurts. It's some sort of inverse compression. Make it longer before you send it and condense it again after receiving. Maybe we might try to do the opposite. Write a full email, let the AI condense it into the summary or send that. Or how about you learn to write concise emails to begin with? Yep. Or maybe digital communication is getting pointless anyways, since there are only bots left on both sides in any case. I'm just talking about work emails, though, here, which aren't bots. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I'm tired of it. Be human. What else should you do? Be human. Take the time to suck at something. I'll be way more interested in your crappy beginnings full of personality. I'll be way more interested in the craft you spend hours with. I'll be way more interested in your article with typos, grammatical inaccuracies, and stylistic flaws, but full of your wit and passion. Your story matters, not the one the AI compiled from the statistical probabilities of millions of other stories, because I'm tired of it. Yeah, I get this position. I get the point. I feel that. I do. And I'm someone who wrote a few articles on my blog and like made a few articles that were completely LLM driven. There's something about those articles that just it wasn't good. I didn't feel good publishing them. I kind of felt like I was deceiving everybody by publishing them. So it's just kind of how I felt. And yeah, I think too much of the LLM content will break the internet. It causes issues for learners. It causes issues for search engines, for facts online. Like, I think it's a big problem. So I like this article. So if you liked this video, please leave a like on the video, or tell me how I'm completely wrong in the comments. Like, let me know. What do you actually think? Are you a fan of LLM based content? Do you think this is all the future? Do you think we're all going to use LLMs all the time to write software? Or are you more of I think we should move towards the craftsman end of things and be better than the LLMs at writing software? So let me know in the comments. If you want to be here for the recording of these, we do these every week at 8 p.m. Pacific time over on Twitch. So the link is in the description. All right. Everybody have a good one. Okay. 3. Let's end this. Can't type. It's over. The AI is taking my job. All of them. Alrighty. So there's another one in the can. What else should we talk about? Should we do Intel? Or should we do something else? We had like TypeSafe, Hypermedia, how photos were transmitted by wire in the 1930s. That looked interesting. I think these are old. I don't think we want to do these anymore. You can own more than one type of computer. That was building an HTMX SSR framework. This one was probably pretty interesting. How long is this one? Oh, this one's really long. I think this one's probably too long to do tonight. Hmm. Why get one? I want to do this one. Oh, why GitHub actually won? I am curious about this. I want to know why. Why? Oh, and sorry for doing it late, but I'll give you a star on all your GitHub projects. I hope it'll make you happy. Oh. You don't have to do that. Like, you should just start if you like the project. I don't have like a bunch of like good projects or anything on GitHub. I don't claim to have a great GitHub profile, but I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Alrighty. Marker. Why GitHub 1? Okay. All right. Let's figure it out. Why did GitHub win? How GitHub actually became the dominant force it is today from one of its co-founders? Scott, really? Who is this? Scott Chacon? Who's this? Wikipedia? GitHub. He's along with Tom Preston Warner. Okay. All right. So he's legit. He's one of the founders. Cool. Okay, I didn't realize that when I saved this article. A few days ago, a video produced by Theo was posted in his very popular YouTube channel where he reviews an article written by the Graphite team entitled How GitHub Replaced SourceForge as the Dominant Code Hosting Platform. Theo's title was a little more succinct. Why GitHub won? Okay. Being a co-founder of GitHub, I found Greg's article and Theo's subsequent commentary fun, but figured that it might be interesting to write up my own take on the reasoning behind the rise and dominance of GitHub and perhaps correct a few things that were not quite right from the outside analysis. Being at the center of a phenomenon like this can certainly leave you with blind spots, but unlike these youngsters, I was actually there. Hell, I wrote the book. Oh, pro Git. So here's an insider's take on why GitHub won. You already. I planned to do it when I saw it for the first time, but then forgot. No, I already did it. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Again, you didn't have to do that, but I do appreciate it. TLDR. If you want a very short read, here's the quick version of why I believe GitHub won and why you're probably using the site to this day. I can boil it down to exactly 2 reasons that happen to resonate with each other at the perfect frequency. GitHub started at the right time, and GitHub had good taste. It is amazing to me how much of company founding can come down to, and design and app development can just come down to good taste. It's kind of interesting. All 4 GitHub co-founders had flops both before and after GitHub. Chris and PJ couldn't quite make fam spam? What is that? Fam spam? Keep in touch with everyone you love. This is Facebook before Facebook was the thing. Fam spam. Gone are the days of remembering 12 different email addresses and forgetting to reply all. With Fam Spam, your family has one email address everyone can use to send messages. Oh my gosh. This was Facebook before Facebook. Wow. Tom and I couldn't quite make Chatterbug explode after GitHub. Oh, what's this one now? Okay, what's Chatterbug? Helps you learn languages from real people. Oh, okay. This is cool. Like connects people to people who are learning languages. That seems like something that should be built into like Duolingo or something. I think both of these ventures had good taste and great product, but wasn't the right time or place or market or whatever for them to become GitHub level. At the time GitHub was starting, distributed open source version control tools were starting to get useful, solid, and adopted, and there were nobody around seriously, much less commercially, host them. Big hosts didn't care, and smaller players weren't serious. Furthermore, the players, SourceForge, Google Code, etc., who eventually did care after seeing Git and GitHub rising in popularity, simply had no taste. They could never have competed with a developer tools company whose co-founders were all product-focused, open-source software developers. Interesting. We cared about the developer experience and had the creativity to throw away assumptions about what it was supposed to be and build how we wanted to work. Everyone else tried to build what they thought they could sell to advisors or CTOs. That's why GitHub won. Okay, I know this is a TLDR, but I want to know the specifics of like what did they have good taste with? What specifically was better than the other platforms at the time? Now that's out of the way, if you're interested in some storytelling, let me lead you down the path of how some of this actually unfolded from the inside. The environment. Let's go back to the beginning of the story. I'll dig a little more into the GitHub started at the right time theme from the point of view of a software developer circa 2005. So this was way before I got into the industry. This is when Git had its first commit by Linus and Mercurial had its first commit by Olivia. Okay. My Windows Vista, Ubuntu, and Mac Tiger desktops, circa a stupid long time ago. I was fixing Windows Vista computers and fumbling around with Ubuntu. That's where I was at that time. What was it like to develop software almost 20 years ago? And how was this an environment where Git would win over people and a GitHub could be born? If you were a software developer in 2005, you were probably, hopefully, using a centralized version control system like Subversion. I professionally used RCS, CVS, Subversion, and Perforce before Git came along. Hell, I was actually in a company that FTP'd its PHP files directly to the production server. I actually did that, at a company that I first worked at. That was how I deployed the PHP site. So, yeah. I've been there. It wasn't circa that time, but I was deploying it like it was. Now, if you were working on proprietary commercial software, centralized version control systems like SVN honestly wasn't the most horrible thing. It was pretty simple to check out, make changes, check back in. Branching and merging completely sucked, but in a lot of situations it could basically be avoided. I'm not sure I ever really used branching in Subversion or Perforce. FTP for deployment is crazy. It was pretty crazy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it was not ideal, but it was just me and it worked. I definitely didn't accidentally delete things and wasn't able to roll it back. I definitely didn't do that. Nope. People probably complain more about Git today than they did about SVN back then, to be honest. The user interface and mental model is arguably simpler than Git. Oh. Okay, this is either beautiful or horrible, or maybe it's both at the same time. Yikes. Okay, it's beautiful as in like I liked the UI. It's bad because it's like it's a GUI for source control. I don't like it. It like reminds me of TFVC, and I didn't like TFVC. Team Foundation version of control is bad. I don't like it. We still have to use it at work sometimes. It's just not good. The big problem that I think started coming to a head around this time was not in the world of professional development within closed, trusted teams. The big problem was within the growing world of open source. You see, open source was barely a thing before this time, especially compared to today. Most of you kids probably don't remember a time where there wasn't millions of open source projects around, but the phrase was only coined in 1998. Yep. So I never knew a time without open source free software. Like, I've always had it. It's always been around. So, in a sense of scale, Dirk Ryle published a paper in 2008 analyzing global open source project trends, and they estimated that there were a total of 1,800 active open source projects in the world at the time. In 2005, certainly far fewer. Okay. Yeah, but it was on an exponential curve up, and I bet it's only continued to grow probably. To put this in perspective, there's over 280 million public repositories on GitHub alone today. So why did open source help it usher in the era of Git and GitHub? Because open source was growing fast, and centralized version control systems were particularly bad at open contribution strategies. That is, you couldn't easily share a project publicly and then take contributions back on it in a simple manner. Because and those source control systems being centralized and not open probably really affected that a lot. Contributing to open source in 2005. Really, how bad could it have been? If you would like to see me talk about what open source contributing was like via my AWS Tokyo keynote 10 years ago, check it out and you can skip the next few paragraphs. No, we're going to read instead. Basically, you could make your Subversion server read only for unauthenticated users. This is generally how you hosted an open source project, or you put a tarball somewhere occasionally. That's most Linux projects were just tarballs. If you wanted to contribute, essentially you had to check out the latest version, make your changes, generate a patch file with GNU diff. Oh my goodness. That doesn't sound fun. Upload that patch file into a ticketing system or email list used by the project. Then the maintainer needed to pull down that patch file, apply it to the project to see if it applied cleanly and worked properly. Heaven forbid they have changes on that area. Oh my goodness. Either submit feedback, make changes, or commit the change. There are still artifacts of this around the internet. I used the track project at some points for this type of project, and you can still see their submitting patches guide as an example of how a change would be suggested. Oh my goodness. Provide the patch. Getting started. SVN checkout. Yeah. Make some changes. Adding the files. SVN add. Make the patch. Patch is a single file. Okay, it looks kind of like git diff. Mostly. And then you pipe that out to a diff. And then you mercurial export tip with git, assuming your patch corresponds to. Then add the keyword patch as a hint to developers that patch has been provided. And you attach your file to the ticket. Yeah. After that, depending on lots of factors. So what if you delete a file as part of your patch? What if you need to move around files? Like, how does that work? Can you do that in these patch files? Like, or is it just changes to existing files? Like, I'd be interested to know. If you know, comment below. But, yeah, it was a goddamn nightmare. The Rails project, as well as my friends and future GitHub co-founders at Air, used small ticketing system called Lighthouse, which is mind-blowingly still up. And one of my earliest open source projects was a commercial command line tool, called Git Lighthouse that could simplify the process of pulling down and applying patches from the tickets you wanted to test out. Here is an example of 3 different versions of patches that were submitted to the Rails project in the early days. You just submitted diff files. This is basically just a diff files on a kind of a forum thing. Essentially, this process sucked enough that when something came around that was simplified it, it was quickly embraced. And that something was GitHub. But first, we needed a Git. The rise of Git. Git actually started from the fact that Linus Torvalds really liked and, at the time, commercial version control system called BitKeeper. It was actually built specifically to help simplifying the existing kernel development process. And there were licensing issues with it. If I remember right, that's what prompted him to rewrite BitKeeper basically, or write his own version control system. If it had been open source or had better licensing terms, there probably would have been no Git or GitHub. However, what happened instead was that one of the Linux developers reverse engineered the protocol, breaking the license terms, and BitKeeper and Linus determined that the spat that followed was untenable, and they mutually decided to part ways. Yep. So Linus took some of the concepts that BitKeeper opened his eyes to, threw together the simplest thing he could that he thought would solve his problems with those principles in mind, and called the new project Git, the information manager from hell. I think that's in the first... Is this the first commit? I think this is one of the first commits. Oh, I have to sign in. Never mind. I think that's in the first commit. It's like he calls it the information manager from hell. It's fairly quickly embraced by several people in the Linux community and slowly grew into an actual sort of version control system. There are several reasons why Git felt awesome at the time. They were branching and merging were dreams rather than nightmares. It was stupendously fast, and permissions were vastly simpler. So these three things are like, when people say that Git is complicated and not user friendly, like, I just can't imagine what the things like it were before. Like, I've never used some of these like SVN and Mercurial, but and like Tortoise SVN or anything, but like I have used TFVC and that was not fun. So yeah, I maybe there's a better option in the future, but I think this was a huge win for the community. In the early days of Git, I would do talks where I would just go on stage, create a few branches, commit changes to them, switch between them, and then merge them together, all in 60 seconds. I would literally see people's jaws drop. Some of them would think I was faking the demo. That's crazy. That's insane. That's just what everybody does now. I just cannot tell you how magical it felt in 2006 to be able to switch and merge contexts that fast and easily. In Subversion, this was a total nightmare. Git is a stupid content tracker. Not having to go over a network to negotiate a commit with a central server was also incredible. It felt like a rocket ship. Everything was so fast. And probably most importantly, you could fork the repository incredibly easy, which meant that you could host your own copy of a repository and have your own write access and push changes there that other people could pull down in their fork. The Linux project started doing this early on for large changes. They could send a request to pull changes from a hosted fork, and Linux could easily do so. In fact, if you're wondering where the terminology pull request comes from, this is it. Git has a git request pull command that would format an email for sending it to a mailing list to help make this process simpler. Oh my goodness. I had just heard of this like a couple days ago, that there was like a way to like spit out emails for pull requests in Git. When GitHub added the ability to basically generate the same type of message, we decided that a request to pull should be called a pull request. A little more backstory on that here if you're curious. Okay. Some people think that developers liked Git because it was distributed and you got the whole history when you cloned, which meant you could easily, or you could share locally, etc. I disagree. I don't think almost anyone really cared about any of that. Distributed was cool because you could do operations fast and you could host your own full writable fork, which made permissions much simpler. You got your own copy of the repo essentially. I could see how that would make things a lot easier versus like having to do everything with one single. So it was the distributed nature of Git actually that made it much simpler for developers to use and to collaborate with, which is really interesting. I never thought about it from that perspective. I think that's neat. It was cool because contributing went from a problem of who had permissions to push into the simplicity of who had something interesting to pull. And of course, the last point led directly to GitHub and the rise of GitHub. Late last year, I interviewed my GitHub co-founder, Tom, and among the things we discussed, he told the story of how he got the initial idea working on GitHub. Essentially, when he was working at PowerSet, Tom's team started using Git internally. However, it was a pain in the ass to add other team members to the internal server because Git's main protocol was over SSH, which means you needed a user with SSH privileges on the machine. For everyone, it was difficult. It was difficult and for most of the team not worth it. This spawned the concept for him of making this process as easy as possible. Git is awesome. Git hosting is a pain in the ass. This is why Tom started working on GitHub. Oh, this is some real good design here. I like it. This is some early stuff. I went through my old emails to see if I could find the first time I heard about Tom's GitHub project, and it was this email from Chris responding to a Git screencast I made in late 2007. Hi Scott, awesome. I actually have a handful of apps I deploy to Git. The screencast is great, really well made. I like the overlays and it's nice to go into the actual Git usage, merging, pushing, Git-K, etc. Tom and I are actually working on a Git site, github.com. It's public push point like repo.or.cz, but user-centric rather than project-centric. The idea is easy forking and contributing. Okay, so they were distributed and they were focused on making this easy for developers, which sounds like a win-win. I feel like something like decentralized version control system architecture would work nicer. I don't know though. So are you talking about like Git as a decentralized version control system is like nice to work with, or are you talking about like is GitHub like do they need to be more decentralized? Should there be more competitors, or should you like be like more decentralized at the core, doing things like a blockchain or something? Like what are you referring to, out of curiosity? But we can come back to that. We can go back to the article for a minute and then we can come back to that. Oh, not having a centralized server where everything goes and everyone needs to pull from there. Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I think that there's probably better ways. Like, I think having one single host be GitHub and GitLab, and that's basically it for Git hosting. I think if everyone hosted their Git servers more and had a better system for doing pull requests across those systems, I think you could have a better environment overall. More like updates are pushed to everyone so conflicts don't occur so frequently. I agree. I think that would be good too. I really do think that would be good too. But you can do like Git fetch more often, but I think it should be pushed to the fork more often. Like you should have an option to keep a fork in sync. I think that would be nice. It was a secret side project between the two of them, and at that point, also Chris, lowercase h, and and when I started chatting with Chris and Tom about GitHub Ruby libraries that ran the site, eventually how I wiggled my way into the project and company. There are a few interesting things about this pitch. The first is that they compared it to the only other real public Git hosting site, repo.or.cz, which also miraculously is still running if you wanted to see. Okay. What is this site? Public Git hosting site. Oh, there's all sorts of stuff on here. This is... Oh. Yeah, this is real user friendly. I bet I could get used to this really quick though, actually. Port of a whole Linux system on the ARM. Interesting. Okay. I didn't know this site existed. But made a crucial innovation over that site and every other hosting site like it, which is make it user-centric rather than project-centric. Before this, if you wanted to host something on SourceForge or whatever, you needed to grab the name. With GitHub, you could make any project you want, named anything you want, because it's namespace to your user, which makes it way easier to fork too. Because if you had to fork and then figure out a name for every project you did, that'd be really annoying. The second was that they focused on pull model rather than a push model. Basically permissions thing I talked about before. The third is that not ugly was a core feature. GitHub had taste. Okay, I'm not going to say this site is tasteful, but I am going to say it's more tasteful than this site. by just a hair. Not a ton, just a hair. Git wins. This is why Git was cool and why GitHub was started to make things easier. But the question is, why did Git win? Lots of distributed systems sprang up during this time. Mercurial was similar in a lot of ways and better in many. Why did Git come out on top of the great DVCS war? It's like Facebook picked Mercurial. I think they still use Mercurial internally, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, yeah, why? I think the answer here was PR. Okay. So it was more GitHub won, or Git won because GitHub won, and GitHub won because of PR? Is that what they're claiming? Which is, if that is what they're claiming, that's really interesting. There are two big PR gorillas fighting it out for the why did Git win answer. The first was the Linux and by extension Linus. The other was GitHub and specifically the Rails community. Maybe it was Linus Linux. The Linux project using Git and Linus having started the project gave instant credibility to it. Everyone knew Linux. Everyone knew Linus. If you made an amazing operating system that everyone uses, at least for their servers, next year is the year of the Linux on desktop. It's always just next year. Next year is the year of the Linux desktop. Every year, it's just around the corner. He can certainly make the next level version control system. And even if it's difficult to use, that just means he's smarter than us and we should try harder, right? This video is one of the first talks about Git online circa 2007. It's Linus talking about Git and distributed version control systems, then a brand new concept at the Google campus. It came out in between when I started using Git in 2005 and when I started at GitHub mid-2008. I watched it several times, as did many millions of people. Who doesn't like listening to the Linux guy say CVS is the dumbest stuff that has ever been thought of, and everyone who disagrees is ugly and stupid? At Google. It's just great PR. Beyond that, if you conflate Linux and Linus, which most people do, there's an argument that Linux itself pushed Git adoption incredibly through Android. This is where I really don't know much impact my or know how much impact my own efforts at GitHub or GitHub's efforts had compared to this big, quiet, behind the scenes effect of Android becoming a thing at exactly the same time, or even my personal impact in either of both of these fronts, doing Git talks and corporate training for years. In early September 2008, right as Android 1 was being released, like 2 weeks after this email, but before I did the training, Sean Pierce, an early superhero in the Git ecosystem, wrote me this email asking me to help train the Google Android team on Git. Scott, are you in the Bay Area? Google is interested in giving an in-person Git training talk to about 200 engineers, given your work on GitCast and the book. All of them are migrating from Perforce to Git. Need it to do so in short order. Talking about this time frame. Please keep the information private. Okay. It's difficult to determine what impact Android had in corporate Git adoption, but it certainly wasn't zero. While the Google Android team was first that I did corporate training for under the GitHub banner, I also eventually did Git training for engineering teams at Motorola, Qualcomm, Ericsson, and Broadcom, just to name the telecoms. After that was before we hired a team to do this for us full time. Linus pushed Git with his broad-ranging brand and superior nerd PR that Mercurial never got, but Android furthermore pushed Git uniquely, via its dependence from the Linux kernel into massive companies out of pure practicality that it also otherwise never would have happened, or at least another decade. For at least another decade. Maybe it was GitHub. There is also, I must say, with a grain of hopeful humility, a possibility that GitHub was the determining factor in the eventual dominance of Git over Mercurial. Or maybe it was all of this at once. Perhaps it could have been everything together, working together for this. Like, I think that's pretty likely. GitHub had an incredible luck to have an amazingly supportive and hip community that embraced us right out of the gate, namely the Ruby community. Within months, everybody in the Ruby community put their stuff on GitHub. Rails was the hot stuff at the time. It was cooler than PHP, JS frameworks weren't really around, and there was no Node, etc. So everyone was paying attention to what the hip cats in the Ruby community were doing. They were the bleeding edge of cool development in the software world, and they were using GitHub. And it's not just me. Linus himself also recently said that from his perspective, the Ruby community unexpectedly made Git explode overnight. He doesn't credit GitHub for that by name, but I think it's impossible for anyone to argue that Ruby community didn't adopt Git in a very large part due to us. By the transitive property and some speculation, I'll make the claim that Linus in fact thinks GitHub is the reason Git won. I don't think Linus loves GitHub that much. Like, I don't think he's like a huge fan. So just based on like some of the stuff I've heard about how he doesn't like PRs and like he still likes mailing lists. So I it's not like the way he prefers to work. So I don't think he's just going to say that. So just take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think he might indirectly be saying that. I remember all of us, Chris, Tom, PJ, and myself, sitting at tables at Ruby conference with all the guys in the early Ruby community, showing them GitHub, selling them on Git, doing talks, etc. We were all speaking at the same conferences. We all drank beers together after Ruby meetups in SF. These were the guys who started Rails, Heroku, Twitter, jQuery, you name it. It's not that we were selling it. It's that we were all sharing what we were passionate about. There was a high level of trust in this community, and the GitHub founders were a deep and authentic part of it. And we all tried each other's stuff and supported each other. The Ruby community using GitHub meant that every conference talk everywhere had a GitHub plug in it. Free advertising everywhere. This meant that as more and more projects moved to or were started on GitHub, even people who liked Mercurial had no real choice but to use Git. After a while, the problem wasn't just worth it. or after a while, it probably just wasn't worth it. GitHub's dominance in the hosting sphere just crushed Mercurial in just the span of a few years. In Mercurial land, there was Bitbucket, which was started for Mercurial hosting. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought Bitbucket was a Git host by default. I didn't realize it was Mercurial by default. And written in the Django framework, but I think we just had too much of a head start and there wasn't enough differentiation. The Python community just didn't adopt it as aggressively as our Ruby community did. As early as December 2008, GitHub was hosting about 27,000 public repositories, where Bitbucket had a little over 1,000. It became difficult to catch up. How do I remember those numbers, you might ask? Well, I had a website I put up called whyisgitbetterthanx.com, and is this website still up? It's not linked, so it's probably not still up. No. It doesn't look like it's still up. Oh, this is the source code for the site. Okay. And the site is... Oh, it's thinking. It's thinking about it. Nope. Nope, the site is down. So. Okay. And this guy named Jesper emailed me to say that one of my points was incorrect, where I argued Git has GitHub and Mercurial has Bazaar, or Mercurial and Bazaar didn't have a GitHub. I rather arrogantly argued that they're not in the same league. Okay, yeah, I could see how you'd be offended. To his credit, he never called me out on my response, which now seems real snippy of me in hindsight. But it turns out that Jesper, in fact, was the founder of Bitbucket. Whoopsie. A year or so later, we met up with him in Amsterdam, drank some nice whiskey together, and have remained friendly ever since. The competitive field collapses. In the end, whether it was GitHub that helped Git win or Git that helped GitHub win, it was quickly over. I think it was both. I think it was an interweaving of both that made it work. In 2006 and 2007, people were first learning about distributed version control systems, and Git and Mercurial were starting to fight it out. In 2008, GitHub launched. In 2011, both Google Code and Bitbucket added Git support, which will mark the year as the nail was in the Mercurial coffin. Git had won, and GitHub was now essentially unbeatable. Just 4 years later, in 2015, Google Code just completely gave up and shut its service down. In the email they sent out, they basically said, just move to GitHub. If I remember correctly, they even reached out to us for help with the migration. Yep. So why not Google Code? Of course, while Bitbucket started after us, so we had a head start, there were other hosting sites that existed before us. So why didn't they win? In early 2009, Google Code added Mercurial support, and SourceForge added both Git and Mercurial support. So if these industry monsters had massive user head start and had DVCS support only a few months after we launched, why didn't they wipe the floor with us little guys? Not only little, but also nearly completely unfunded. Chris was able to put a bit of money into a bootstrap, if I recall right, but the rest of us were totally broke and we didn't raise any outside funding. When Google Code launched Mercurial support, we were still 4 developers working out of cafes in South Beach with zero VC investment. We struck deals with our buddies at Engine Yard for help with hosting costs because we really didn't have the cash. How is it possible that this tiny, unfunded team made Google Code fold in just a few years? Side note, GitHub funding. As a side note, speaking of funding, the article I'm reacting to states VC investment wasn't an option for the co-founders. This is purely untrue. From the very first days, we were talking to VCs. When PJ emailed me in July of 2008 to say they wanted me to join with them, we should all make the leap, quit our respective jobs, and make this a full-time thing instead of a side project. He explicitly said, "We've been talking to one VC in particular we'd like a lot, and we want to raise a handful of money to do a few things." These were things like get an office, hire people, etc. It was always on the table. We could have done it literally any time. We considered and thoroughly rejected, or thoughtfully rejected, the idea constantly over the years. We didn't really need an office. We didn't really need more people yet. Not only that, we actually nearly rejected the idea when we started to consider our $100 million A round from Andreessen Horowitz. 4 years later, I remember vividly the night we all sat down for dinner at some restaurant in Folsom Street in April of 2012 and argued very heatedly if we should take capital round at all. We basically had offers from A16Z, Benchmark, Sequoia, Bessemer, pretty much the best VC firms on the planet, on the table, and meanwhile us four of us sat around heatedly yelling at each other about whether or not we should tell all of them thanks but no thanks, offers that other tech entrepreneurs would have literally killed for. But the point is that it wasn't that we couldn't have raised the money, but that we didn't even need to in order to take down the entire field. GitHub had taste. The original article is correct. The other hosts focused on distribution and revenue streams. We cared about developers. But it wasn't about when they added Git. It never really mattered. They never had any taste. They never cared about the developer workflow. They could have added Git at any time, and I think they all still would have lost. I think so too. There's a lot that had it. Although, all this to say, like, there's still a ton of people who use, well, not maybe a ton, but there's quite a bit of people who use like GitLab and who use, some use Bitbucket still, but there are other hosting providers out there. So I think that's important to remember here, that while they're dominant, they're not necessarily the only game in town. You can try to explain it by the features or value adds, but the core takeaway is that it's still relevant to starting a startup today, is more fundamental than if we had an activity feed or profile page or whatever. The much simpler, much more fundamentally interesting thing that I think showed in everything that we did was that we built it for ourselves. We had taste. We cared about the experience. I think this is really important in startups. That you're building it for yourself. Take that from me for what it is. I've never bootstrapped a company, but that is one common thing that I see in startups that work. It's things that people needed themselves, and ultimately that's what worked. Because ultimately, if you build it for yourself and you keep it lean, then you'll always have a customer, essentially. Even if you're the only one who uses it, you'll have incentive to keep it around. And the longer you stick around, the more likely you are to succeed at that thing. So as long as you keep that in mind, you might actually make it with your product that way. We were developers, and we built what we wanted in order to enable how we wanted to ideally work. We were the only tool in the space built by developers for developers, without PMs or accountants or CEOs trying to optimize for revenue rather than for developer experience. In the end, we won because the open source community started to converge on distributed version control, and we were the only ones in the hosting space that truly cared about how developers worked at all. The only ones who questioned it, approached it from the first principles, tried to make it better holistically rather than just throwing more features into something existing in order to sell it. Why GitHub won? So to sum it all up, we won because we started at the right time and we had taste. We were there when a new paradigm was being born, and we approached the problem of helping people embrace that new paradigm with a developer experience-centric approach. that nobody else had the capacity for or interested in. I guess the question is, what's the next sea change in developer workflow, and who will have good enough taste to make it explode in the same way? That's a good question, and right now, I think the easy answer is AI. Like the person who figures out AI with taste is going to be winning. So I think we'll have to see who that turns out being. Is it Cursor? Is it GitHub Copilot? I'm not so sure. I don't think so. I think we got to see something else. But I think that's the next big shakeup. So I'm not convinced that we're going to see the result of that anytime soon. But I thought this was good. I thought this was really great. It was good to see from Scott's perspective, like how things actually went down. So it makes sense. And I agree. I think the distributed nature of Git probably was more compelling than like anything else. If everything else was centralized, that really made it hard for people to contribute who didn't have a copy of the repo. And copying the repo was a lot of work, it sounds like. So I think that was right. But no, I really liked this article. So if you liked this, please leave a review. Please leave a like or subscribe to the channel. If you want to be here for the recording of these, you can join us on Twitch every Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. And the link is in the description below. All right. Everybody have a good one. Okay. But no, I really liked that one. I thought it was good. Hey there, Mr. Old Player. How's it going? Why GitHub 1 end? There we go. All right. Okay. I thought that was pretty good. So, yeah. I wonder what we should do next. Should we do one more? Can we try one more? What else is there to read and talk about? So we did that one. Windows NT versus Unix. This could be a long discussion. There's a lot of history here. So this one is, where's the, yeah, it's, I don't know if I want to do like one that's like this long. That last one was long though, but I really wanted to do that one. Ooh, why Gumroad didn't choose HTMX. Yeah, this one might be fun. This one might be interesting. Let's do this one. This one will be our last one, and then I'm gonna hop off. I got work tomorrow, and my voice is going. I gotta work up to this. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Why Gumroad didn't choose HTMX. At Gumroad, we recently embarked on a new project called Helper. As the CEO, I was initially quite optimistic about using HTMX for this project, even though some team members were less enthusiastic. My optimism stemmed from previous experience with React, which often felt like overkill for our needs. I thought HTMX could be a good solution to keep our front end super light. Okay, this is a bunch of React code. I think that's what's in here. No, there are HTML templates. Source with HTMX. Oh, no, this is HTMX code. Yeah, okay. In fact, I shared this sentiment with our team in Slack. HTMX.org may be a way of adding simple interactions to start, and initially it seemed promising. As one of our engineers at Gumroad eloquently put it, HTMX is officially a meme to make fun of how overly complicated the JS landscape has gotten. Much like Tailwind is just a different syntax for inline CSS, HTMX is a different syntax for inline JS. Sort of. I think it's more like, I think it's an extension for HTML, but I don't think it's more of like a JS thing at all. Not that you can't use it with JS, but I think it's more of an extension. However, unlike Tailwind, which has found its place in our toolkit, HTMX didn't scale for our purposes and didn't lead to the best user experience for our customers, at least for our use case. Here's why. It's interesting they say that, because I'm using it in a project right now, and I've used it in 2 projects. They're pretty small projects, admittedly, but I really do wonder why they didn't work out for them. So I'll be interested to read this, because I like it. I think it's way simpler than syncing state to a client side library. Like I think it's way simpler than doing like Pinea or Vuex for Vue and React. Even for like Svelte, I think it's way simpler to just do HTMX and Go. So intuition and developer experience. While it would have been possible to do the right thing in HTMX, we found it much more intuitive and fun to get everything working with Next.js. Really. The development process felt natural with Next.js, whereas with HTMX, it often felt unnatural and forced. For example, when building complex forms with dynamic validation and conditional fields, we found ourselves writing convoluted server-side logic to handle what would be straightforward client-side operations in React. That's interesting, because I find the forms in HTMX to be way simpler, because you can just write your validation logic once and then send it to and just send it to the server and then get it back. You don't have to do it in both places, and you don't have this danger of not doing it right by forgetting to do something on the back end that you did on the front end, then having to do it in 2 places in 2 languages, or share a library between the 2 or something. Like I feel like it's way easier to do forms in HTMX. UX limitations. HTMX ended up pushing our app towards a Rails CRUD approach, which led to really poor, or at least boring and generic, user experience by default. We found ourselves constantly fighting against this tendency, which was counterproductive. For instance, implementing a drag-and-drop interface for our workflow builder proved to be a significant challenge with HTMX, requiring workarounds that felt clunky compared to smooth experience we could achieve with React libraries. Okay, a drag-and-drop interface should definitely be a place where you escape hatch out into something like web components or embedding React or something. That sounds like you're dragging and dropping things around a board or something. That definitely sounds like you need something beyond HTMX. I will 100% agree with that. AI and tooling support. It's worth noting that AI tools are intimately familiar with Next.js and not so much with HTMX. Due to the lack of open source training data, this is similar to the issues Rails faces. While not a deal breaker, it did impact our development speed and ease of finding solutions to problems. When we encountered issues, the wealth of resources available for React Next.js make troubleshooting much faster. I don't know about AI being better or worse. Like, I've found it to be just fine. Like, it figures out how to use HTMX just fine. And you mix that with the HTMX LSPs, and I find it to be all right. The development experience to be comparable to Vue, at least. I haven't done a ton with Next.js, so I can't speak to that. Scalability concerns. As our project... I can't talk. Scalability concerns. As our project grew in complexity, we found HTMX struggling to keep up with our needs. The simplicity that initially attracted us began to feel limiting, and we really tried to implement more sophisticated interactions and state management. For example, we added features like real-time collaboration and complex data visualization. Managing state across multiple components became increasingly difficult with HTMX's server-centric approach. Yeah, I don't know if complex data viz is something you should do with this. Like, you should maybe load that data into an element, and then that element should have a bunch of JS in order to render that data visualization. I think that's probably the way you should probably do it, or yeah, I just escape hatch out to a front end framework there, because that's not where HTMX shines, is data viz and stuff. It keeps everything else really simple, and I think maybe taking an all or nothing approach to HTMX is probably not a good idea. I think you should take the core of your app, and most of what you're building is simple. You're moving across forms. You've got tabs. You've got like a sidebar, and you're moving across pages in your apps. You've got accordions or something. You've got options on the page, and you're submitting those options back to a server. But as soon as you get to the point where you need just a little more reactivity and you need a little more interactivity, you should take that chunk, make it interactive, and put that as an island in your app. That's my opinion. I think you should make your islands interactive, but use HTMX as like the backbone of most of the app. That's kind of where I'm at. That's where I think the ideal is. And that keeps most things as simple as possible, I think. You get the benefit of both worlds at that point. Community and ecosystem. The React Next.js ecosystem is vast and mature, offering solutions to almost any problem we encountered. With HTMX, we often found ourselves reinventing the wheel or compromising on functionality. This became particularly evident when we needed to integrate third-party services and libraries, which often had React bindings but no HTMX equivalents. This is 100% true. You're not going to find Clerk for HTMX. Like, it's just not going to happen. So this is definitely a thing that really slows you down. Ultimately, we ended up moving to React Next.js, which has been a really great fit for building complex UI we've been looking for. We're happy with this decision for now. It allowed us to move faster, create more engaging user experiences, and leverage a wealth of online and existing tools and libraries. This experience has reinforced a valuable lesson. While it's important to consider lightweight alternatives, it's equally crucial to choose technologies that can grow with your project and support your long-term vision. For Helper, React and Next.js have proven to be that choice. Since we've moved there, we've had the ability to seriously upgrade our app's user experience for our core customers. Drag and drop functionality. One of the key features of our workflow builder is the ability to reorder steps through drag and drop. While it's possible to implement drag and drop with HTMX, we found that the available solutions felt clunky and required a significant amount of custom JavaScript. In contrast, React ecosystem offers libraries and React Beautiful D&D that provides smooth, accessible drag and drop with minimal setup. Complex state management. This is interesting. I find it to be less complex to manage state in one place rather than multiple. But let's see what this says. Complex state management. Each workflow step has its own set of configurations and conditional logic. As users edit these, we need to update the UI in real time to reflect changes and their implications on other setups. With HTMX, this would require numerous server round trips or complex client-side state management that goes against HTMX's server-centric philosophy. I don't think that like a highly interactive component on the page goes against HTMX's server-centric philosophy. Like that's where you should escape hatch out. I said it before and I'll say it again. Like, you should build the really interactive piece in JS or TS, whatever works best, and maybe even a front end framework. And then from there, you should put that component on the page like that, and then you should have the rest of your app be managed by HTMX and just reap the benefits of simplicity for the simple things, I think. React state management solutions like UState or more advanced options like Redux make this much more straightforward. Dynamic form generation. The configuration for each step type is different and can change based on user input. Generating these dynamic forms and handling their state was more intuitive with React's component model. With HTMX, we found ourselves writing more complex server-side logic to generate and validate these forms. You should already be writing, like, the validation should be the same and should be less in my mind. You write it once on the back end, and you don't have to write it at all on the front end at that point. And you can still make it reactive to, like, as the user's typing, do the validation. I don't know if I buy this. I'd love to see the code for the form stuff and the before and after. I'd love to see what was going on there, because something feels wrong there. Real-time collaboration. While not visible, okay, I can tell you right now, like that should be one of those interactive components. That should not be HTMX. You can load data in real time using HTMX into that attribute on the element that's super interactive. You can use it for that, but the actual component itself, the real-time component, don't compromise on that. Use a JS library or JavaScript directly. While not visible in this screenshot, we implemented features allowing multiple users to edit workflows simultaneously. Implementing this with WebSockets and React was relatively straightforward, whereas with HTMX it would require more complex server-side logic and custom JavaScript to handle real-time updates. Again, are you just moving your complexity to one end or the other? Or is it actually a better UX one way or the other? I don't know. I'm not convinced. Performance optimization. As workflows grew larger and more complex, we needed fine-grained control over rendering optimizations. React's virtual DOM and hooks like useMemo and useCallback allow us to optimize performance in ways that really weren't as readily available or intuitive with HTMX. I'd argue they're not necessary. Like you do that optimization on the server, and then you don't have to do it again on the client, or you use just JavaScript to do it on the client, but I don't think that's necessary. It's important to note, while these challenges aren't insurmountable with HTMX, we found addressing them often led us away from HTMX's strength and towards the solutions that felt more natural in a JavaScript-heavy environment. This realization was a key factor to our decision to switch to React and Next.js. We acknowledge that HTMX may be a great fit for many projects, especially those with simpler interaction models or those built on top of existing server-rendered applications. Our experience doesn't invalidate the benefits others have found in HTMX. The key is understanding your project's specific needs and choosing the tool that best aligns with those requirements. In our case, the complex, stateful nature of Helper's interface made React and Next.js a better fit. However, we continue to appreciate HTMX's approach and may consider it for future projects where its strengths align better with our needs. That said, we're always open to reevaluating our tech stack and our needs as our needs evolve and new technologies emerge. Who knows what the future might bring? Okay. I thought that was a good alternate perspective on HTMX. I would have liked to see more source code and actually like links to the source code, because this, so you end up with HX on after request. They're resetting things. If detail, delete this, remove only the category. This will not affect existing tickets. Removing. What are they doing here? They're doing things in the class itself. It's kind of weird. They're doing it all inline. I wonder how much of this is the case of the React brain, like where you've been steeped in like how React does things and front end frameworks do things for so long. Like I had this at first, like it just didn't make sense to me. Like I had to like go through like a bunch of the examples to figure out how to do things, and I just wonder if it's a perspective issue. But it's very possible it just wasn't a good fit. So that's pretty possible. So I liked hearing this perspective. I think it's awesome that HTMX and Carson put this up on their own website. I think it's great that he shows both pros and cons of using HTMX, and he doesn't shy away from hearing criticism or even posting criticism on the website. So I think that's pretty awesome. It's pretty transparent. So I like it. That's kind of a breath of fresh air. So but if you liked this, please leave a thumbs up, maybe leave a comment. If you didn't like this, if you think HTMX is the best thing ever and this article was very wrong, then leave a comment. If you think the opposite, leave a comment as well. So we record these every Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific time over on Twitch. The link is in the description below. So everybody have a good one. Alrighty. Alright. I think with that, I'm probably going to end this stream. I think I'm good for the night. I think we did pretty good. We got through a few articles, and they'll make some good YouTube videos, and we didn't get to code any. I think I wanna do a stream maybe later this week where we get to just code. I miss those streams. I think those were fun. Maybe we'll do some Windows 98 streaming or something, or maybe we'll work on some Go and HTMX and play around with that. So we'll see what comes of it. But yeah, stay tuned for doing some more coding this week, and we'll be on next week. I think we're gonna do more PHP and Laravel next Monday, so that'll be a good time. So all right, I think I'm gonna call it here. Good night, everybody. Yeah, talk to you guys later. Bye.